Hey, what is going on guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video, I'm going to be updating my top lane list for patch 6.11. So first up is going to be Irelia. Right now, Irelia is definitely a very underrated pick in the top lane. She's been receiving some really nice buffs these past few patches, and I finally think that she is back to being a very strong pick in the top lane now. She's a bruiser top lane champion, so when I play Irelia, I like to go Black Cleaver, Sterix, and then after that, I usually just go full tank, and you can still deal so much damage with her in team fights. She has really good 1v2 potential as well, especially once she does hit level 6. If the enemy jungler does try to gank you and they're like around half HP and the enemy laner is also around half HP, then you could turn that and you can end up getting a double kill a lot of the time. Her E is really strong now. It got a nice buff in, I think it was 6.10. It might have been this patch, but her E just does an insane amount of damage now. She's also a really strong laning champion, and she does have really good AoE damage in those mid to late game team fights with her ultimate. And a few cons to Irelia are that she does have weaker crowd control. She doesn't have the best CC in her kit. She doesn't have that ability that she can use to pick out the enemy squishies, and she doesn't have the best engage or disengage either. So if your team is lacking like engage and disengage from your jungle and support, then I wouldn't pick her in that situation. Next up is going to be Wukong. So like Irelia, I feel like Wukong is still pretty underrated right now. He doesn't have the highest play rate, but his win rate against a lot of the meta champions are really good. He's got a winning win rate against champions like Yasuo, Fizz, Jax, Irelia. So I feel like if you know how to play Wukong correctly, then you can definitely do really well with him. He's got a great early to mid game. Once you do get rank 2 in your ultimate, look to start teamfighting, because the damage spike you get from leveling up your ultimate from rank 1 to rank 2 is just absolutely crazy. I'm pretty sure the base damage goes up by like 100 or something. It might even be more than that, but definitely when you are playing as Wukong, look to teamfight once you do get to that mid game. He also snowballs really hard as well. He does have a very strong level 6 all-in, and if your jungler does come to gank you once you are at level 6, you're pretty much guaranteed to pick up the kill as long as you don't misplay it. He also does have pretty good trade potential in the laning phase, because he can E in, go for his Q, and then he can use his W to back out, and he does have good juke potential as well with his W. A few cons to Wukong are that he is somewhat weak if he does fall behind. You want to be looking for those engages with Wukong, and you want to jump on the back line, and if you don't have your items and you don't have the damage to assassinate the target you jump on, then you aren't going to be as strong as some of the other top laners. And he is definitely a little bit weaker against disengage, so if the enemy team does have Janna locked already, then in that situation I would not pick Wukong. Next up is going to be Fizz. So right now, Fizz is really strong in the mid lane and in the top lane. I really like him for top lane though, because his build paths are very versatile. If you do fall behind in the laning phase, or if you are going up against a strong AD enemy comp, then you can go for the Iceborne Gauntlet into Sunfire Cape build. But if you do get a nice snowball going in the early game, or if you aren't playing against a whole lot of AD on the enemy team, then you can go for the Trinity Force build and follow that up with a Sunfire Cape or a Spirit Visage, whatever you need to get as your next tank item. So I just really like that Fizz's build path in the top lane is very versatile. He's a very slippery champion too. He's just such an annoying champion to deal with, especially once he does get 40% CDR. His E is on a 4 or 5 second cooldown once you do get to those mid to late game team fights, so he's just a hard champion to focus. He's kind of like the new Echo, because Echo was a champion that he's just so hard to kill. No matter how much you focus him in a team fight, he's just going to be able to use his ultimate and back out, and that's kind of like Fizz as well. He can jump in with his ultimate, use his E, start auto attacking you a little bit, and then a few seconds later he's gonna have his E off cooldown, so he can just use that to jump right out. The Ignite TP is also really good on him, because it just allows him to go really aggressive in the laning phase. I would recommend taking that over Flash Ignite on Fizz, just so you can get a nice snowball going in the early game. A few cons to Fizz are that he is pretty weak if he does fall behind in the early game, since he doesn't have that good AoE crowd control ability for a mid to late game team fight, so you just need to make sure you do try to go aggressive in the laning phase to get that snowball going. Next on my list is going to be Irelia. So I remember back last season, Irelia was on my top lane list pretty much every single time, and I'm pretty sure she was the champion who I had at the #1 spot for the longest time. It seemed like no matter what patch it was, Irelia was always the strongest top lane champion, and for a while she just kind of fell off. She wasn't seeing the most play, but with these changes to Trinity Force now, she's definitely a very viable and a very strong top lane champion now. She does have the highest pick rate for any top laner this patch, and she also has a very high win rate as well. So when a champion has a high pick rate and a high win rate, it obviously means they are a very strong pick. So with these changes to Trinity Force, it just allows her to become a really strong duelist now. She was already a pretty strong duelist before, but by increasing the attack speed on Trinity Force, it just allows you to get more true damage off now with your W, and it allows you to duel your opponents even better. She does have a really strong early to mid game. Once you do get your Sheen on Irelia, you can outduel a lot of the other top laners in the game, so make sure you do go aggressive as Irelia once you do get Sheen and once you get Trinity Force, because your dueling potential is absolutely crazy. She does have pretty good sustain in the laning phase too with her W. Her gap closer is also really nice for the laning phase for just finishing off those low health minions. It allows her to CS under tower really easily, and you're not going to miss a lot of CS when you are playing as Irelia. She is a bruiser too, so when I play her, I just go Trinity Force on her. I might go for one more AD item or offensive item after that, but if my team is not doing too well, or if we're going even, then I'll just go Trinity Force and then I'll go full tank after that, and you can still deal a lot of damage. A few cons to Irelia are that she is weaker for the first few levels. Levels 1 to 3, she isn't the strongest, so if you are playing a strong early game top lane champion, someone like a Darius, then you can definitely look to punish Irelia for the first few levels. And she also doesn't have the best late game for any top lane champion. She doesn't have that good AoE CC ability, so once you do get to mid to late game team fights, or not mid game, she is still good mid game, but once you get to like the 35 to 40 minute point in the game, then she can get outscaled by some of the other top lane champions. And lastly, to round out the top 5 is going to be Swain. So right now, I feel like even though Swain did receive that nerf in 6.11, he is still an absolutely crazy strong top lane and mid lane pick. He's got a really strong early to mid game. He really doesn't have any bad matchups right now in the top lane, or not any that I can think of. So that just allows him to CS really easily in the laning phase, and he can also look to just bully out the enemy laners, especially if they are melee. He can just put his Q down when they do go in for CS, and they're either going to get the CS and take poke, or they're not going to get the CS and they're going to have to back away. So he's just a really good zoning champion because of his Q. He is an AP bruiser too, so when I play Swain, I like to go usually Rod into Zhonya's and then full tank after that. I might pick up a Rylai's as well, but you really don't need to build full glass cannon Swain because he does synergize really well with the Spirit Visage. If the enemy team does have a lot of AP, then definitely look to pick that item up. He's super hard to kill in mid to late game teamfights because of his ultimate, and if he does get Spirit Visage, then he's just going to be unkillable, and he's just going to be such an annoying champion to deal with. He's got pretty good CC in his kit too with his W and his Q. And I also do like that he does have very versatile build paths. If you do get ahead in the early game as Swain, or if your team is lacking damage, then you can build him Glass Cannon and you can still do really well. Or if your team is lacking that tank champion, then you can go Rod of Ages into tank on Swain and you can still do really well. And a few cons to Swain are that his W can be hard to hit at first, since you do have to predict where the enemies are moving to be able to hit it. And he does not have a gap closer either, so when you are going up against Swain and you are playing jungle, look to camp him in the early game because he probably is going to be pushing out of lane and he is going to be trying to kill the enemy laner. First up on the honorable mentions is going to be Pantheon. So Pantheon definitely could have been at the number 5 spot. I feel like he is a very strong top lane champion if you can get ahead in the early game. If you do end up running Ignite on Pantheon, then definitely look to go for a level 2 all in on him because you can definitely get a really good snowball going and then just take over the game by getting good ults off for your mid and your bot lane. If you do fall behind with him though and you get ganked a lot in the early game, or if you just don't have the best early game, then you are going to get outscaled by a lot of the other top lane champions. Next up is going to be Vladimir. So Vladimir is a pretty good pick for both the top and the mid lane right now. He does have a very strong mid to late game. His early game isn't the strongest anymore because his Q doesn't do the most damage in the early game, but once you do get to mid to late game, the amount of healing you can get off now with Vladimir is just absolutely crazy. If you get like a 3 or 4 man ult off and you're low on HP, then after your ult pops, you're gonna heal for so much and you're just gonna be so annoying to deal with. So when you are playing Vlad, I would recommend building like 1 or 2 AP items on him, and then after that, go full tank. Definitely pick up a Spirit Visage if the enemy team does have a lot of AP, and you can do really well on Vlad for sure. Next up is going to be Kayle. So Kayle also is a very strong laning top lane champion. She really doesn't have a whole lot of bad matchups in the top lane since she is a ranged champion when her E form is active, so that just allows her to CS really easily in the laning phase, and she can poke down a lot of the melee top lane picks. She does scale really well into the late game too, so as long as you can survive the early game as Kayle and you can just keep up in CS, then you can do really well as her once you do get to those mid to late game team fights. Next up is going to be Darius. So I feel like Darius is a really good pick right now in the top lane because we are seeing a lot of melee picks being played right now. Irelia, Jax, Yasuo, and Maokai are 4 of the most picked top laners this patch, and Darius does do really well in those matchups because what he wants to do is he wants to get those auto attacks off on you so that he can deal more damage with his ultimate, and those champions like Jax and Yasuo, they also need to auto attack to deal their damage, so it just allows Darius to have a really good time in the laning phase. And if those champions do go in and try to duel Darius and he's at full HP, then he's probably gonna win that duel every single time. So I feel like as long as you can get those matchups where you are going up against a melee pick in the laning phase, then you can definitely do really well on this champion. Next up is going to be Trundle. So I feel like Trundle is a really good pick right now with the Trinity Force. I did try it out on him this patch and I just did a ton of damage while building or while having that item on him. So I would definitely recommend going for the Trinity Force rush on Trundle this patch. If the enemy team does lock a tank top lane champion, then definitely look to pick him if you are confident on your Trundle. And lastly, on the honorable mentions for this patch, I have Scion. So even though the tank meta is kind of fading away a little bit right now in the top lane, Scion is still a pretty good pick because he does do a lot of damage for a tank champion. You don't even need to go a damage item on Scion, and because his abilities have good base damage on him, you can still deal a lot in those early to mid game team fights and even in the late game as well. He does have really good crowd control in his kit too, so if your team is lacking that good CC tank in the top lane, then I would look to pick up Scion. So that is going to be all for this video, guys. If you did enjoy, then don't forget to leave a like, subscribe if you have not already. So thanks for watching, guys. Have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.